You're listening to the 2020 Nelson Arts Festival Pukapuka Talks. This session features Annabel Langbein in conversation with Nicola Galloway.
Oh, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa, folks. It's lovely to see you here this afternoon and lovely to be on holiday. So I see you're all, like me, in your holiday gears. We're about to head back out to Maraho after this. It's a real privilege for me as a trustee of the Arts Festival and a minor sponsor to be able to introduce Annabel Langbein in our own building here. So Annabel, of course, you will all know Annabel and be well familiar with her recipes and things. And today we're going to be hearing about Annabel's biography, autobiography, which is a very exciting thing. I'm really looking forward to having it read to me myself. And so without further ado, I'll hand you over to Annabel. Thank you.
And
Nicola. So Nicola's going to be doing the talking.
I've got my own. All right. Are we ready? Yes, we're on. Okay, thank you. Welcome to this interview, this talk really, with Annabel. I'm really looking forward to talking about Annabel's new book, Bella, which I assume must be, is that what you people...
My friends call me, yeah.
Everyone calls you Bella, yeah. I've had this book, I think I'm one of the few people in the country to have had a copy of this book for about 3 or 4 or so weeks. And I was telling Annabel just earlier, it's just such a beautifully written book. Really, she's a very good storyteller, so I highly recommend it. Beautiful recipes, and yeah, beautiful. The whole sort of design, and I love all the photos in there of your younger days and older, some later on as well. And I don't really have to do an introduction of Annabel because I think you know who she is. So we've got quite a few questions and stories we want to get through. So I'm just going to launch straight into it. So let's get started.
Yay.
So the first question is really actually about the book and how this is a really quite different book to all of your previous books. It does have some recipes in it, but it isn't a sole recipe book. So. And also, it's not self-published. You've had a publisher. So tell us, how did that come about?
I'd first of all like to say thank you. It's so lovely to be here talking with you today and to be here, Pic, in this fantastic place. Who knew? And for all of you for coming out tonight on holiday night. I love Nelson. So this book, I have been writing a column for Canvas magazine, which is part of the New Zealand Herald for about 3 or 4 years. And I've been writing about food, for a very long time, but in Canvas I write a little 400-word essay and then put in some recipes. And my editor at Canvas is a wonderful woman, Michelle Hurley, and she decided to join Allen & Unwin, the publishing company, as their publisher. And she said to me about over a year ago, you've got to write a book. I said, well, I don't know how to write. I'm not a trained writer. I've never done any writing courses, and I haven't got a clue. She said, you're a great writer. And I didn't really have a lot of confidence. So she took me out for lunch, which is a very clever strategy when you want to get someone to do something. You ply them with alcohol. Food always works for me. And so she took me out for lunch on numerous occasions. And in about late January this year, I said, okay, I'm going to write you a chapter, and if that's what you like, that's what you're going to get. And I'm a complete control freak, so I didn't want to have my words or my voice changed. I didn't want to have someone ghostwrite it for me or an editor who was going to change it. They probably put in a lot more commas than I would normally put, but I wrote the first chapter, and the whole publishing company came back and said, yay, when can you have it finished by? And then lockdown hit. And I had a really stressful lockdown because I had a son being a junior doctor for the NHS working in Croydon Hospital, which was the worst hit hospital, and he got really bad COVID. I had a daughter in downtown Manhattan who was wondering if her apartment was on fire every night because there was smoke coming through the window from all the looting and burning and marches, and she was marching. And so I thought, you know what, I just need to put my head down and make this my focus. And I did it like a job. I literally wrote for 5 hours a day every day for 3 or 4 months. And I probably wrote 80,000 words, and I culled it down to 60,000 words, and I put 60 recipes. So 60,000 words and 60 recipes, which normally would have been 60,000 recipes in a few words.
Yeah.
And I loved it. I got lost in that world. I had so much fun doing it. And I have had the most fantastic experience, having always been a self-publisher, of working with this fabulous publishing company. So it's very nice to be on the other side and working and feeling a very collaborative relationship.
Great. Well, you can see that. Not that I can't see that you've enjoyed the process, but what I can see is that the story, the way you're writing the stories, they just seem to flow so easily, and they're not. They don't go on and on and on. You've got.
I kept it pacey.
You've kept it pacey. You've sort of kept and you've really chosen the right parts of your life to share. So it's beautiful, and I'm glad.
Definitely, thank you. It's not a full stop. It's a beginning.
Yeah. Oh, good. Well, we'll hear more about that later. Okay. So the book starts off with your earlier life and how your interest in food and cooking is clearly influenced by your mother's home cooking and your father's big garden. You grew up in Karori, Wellington, and also spent many summer holidays in Wellington, where you have
in Nelson.
In Nelson. Yes, you grew up in Wellington, in Nelson, and you have a love for the outdoors from a young age. But there's also a family connection to the area. Can you tell us more about that, and also about your time in Nelson as a child?
So, no, I have a very strong, soft place in my heart for Nelson because both of my grandparents came from here. And my father's side, Langbein, they used to own Broadgreen. So that was our family home all those years ago. They bought it from the Buxtons in 1875. And then it was quite a big farm, and it had, they grew lots of vegetables and roses. And he was a very avid horticulturalist, and I think he was a travelling salesman, and he'd bring back plants in the days when you could from all around the world. Wow. So there are still some quite rare plants in that garden. And then on my mother's side, my grandfather was a guy called Percy Boys, who was one of the founding people from Transport Nelson. So my grandparents lived on the hill on Moana Road, Moana Avenue, and we would run down to Tahuna Beach. I spent every holiday here till I was probably 14 or 15. And we'd go out to Rabbit Island, and we'd go to Kaiteriteri, and they had this lovely big albizia tree in the bottom of their garden. And my grandmother was a wonderful storyteller, so she had travelled to Portugal and China and Mexico, and she'd bring back dolls, and we all got these amazing dolls, and she could tell us these stories. So I think a lot of my wanderlust came from her, because she would tell us these incredible stories about these adventures she'd had, and she was such a great storyteller, so your world just opened up. I think always in our family was this idea of food being the central focus. And I didn't grow up in a family with lots of money. My dad was a civil servant, and he paid, at that time when I was about between 10 and 15, I think he paid 68% of his income in tax. So we never had a lot of money, but we had these fantastic experiences and books and conversations and what I'd call a rich life. And I think that's what I've been interested in my own life and in my work, to go, you can be eating beans and rice, but you can have a good life if you build it around the table.
Absolutely. I love how you say your dad, he was the gardener, and he would come home and straight into the garden.
Yeah, take his suit off.
He'd take his suit off, and then he had a basket, and he'd go around, tend to his garden, pick a whole lot of veggies and just drop it at the doorstep, or the kitchen
backyard,
step.
Kitchen.
And then your mum would pick that up, and that would become your dinner, wouldn't it?
She had this fantastic, she taught me about, my mother was very clever actually, but she was also very charming. And she cultivated this fabulous relationship with Cyril, who was our butcher in Cuba Street. And she'd fang it. We had this Plymouth down to Cuba Street. And she'd say, "Oh, Cyril, the schnitzel was a little bit tough this week."
Yeah, okay.
And I'd always get a Cheerio from Cyril as well. You know, he's one of those classic big red-faced butchers with the butcher's block and the sawdust on the floor.
Yeah. Well, it's just that connection with local, she was really living that local life. So had the local butcher, and not on a farm as such, but she had that relationship with the butcher, and then the garden, and then just creating food from that.
And
amazing.
I think for many people here tonight, we grew up with parents who had come out of the war, and they were resourceful, and they wasted nothing, And I think if she was around today, she'd be horrified by just how everything is, we're such a throwaway society. It's incredible. But I feel lucky to have had that because we didn't even have plastic. We didn't even have plastic bags.
No.
Yeah.
And I hope there's a turnaround. I feel there's a turnaround, but yeah. Let's carry on. So in your teen years, and as you do put it bluntly in your book, you were quite rebellious. And at 16, you left home to live with your boyfriend and another friend of his as a Maoist hippie up the Wanganui River. Here, your interest for cooking didn't wane at all. You were in charge of cooking for your group, and most of that was done over an open fire. Can you tell us more about that time?
I think my poor mother.
Sounds so your poor mother for one at 16.
And my poor father,
Yeah.
my poor mother and my poor father. I was so idealistic. I mean, did I have any idea of all the hundreds of, tens of millions of people who died during that whole revolution in China? We were just idealistic about this world being a different place and so anti-money. And I think in those years when you're the best looking that you're ever going to be in life, I never wore any makeup or a dress or high-heeled shoes. And I actually missed a really big, when people talk back, they talk about their teenage years and, going to going to concerts and dressing up and going to parties, and there's a big chunk. I mean, I was living in the bush, for which I feel very grateful. I loved that. But I think I was very lucky at that time to be able to live up the Wanganui River. There were three of us, my boyfriend Murray, his friend Tom, and me. And actually, they sent me some, I got hold of them and said, I got hold of Murray and Tom all these years later and said, look, I'm writing a book. Do you have any photos from us up the Wanganui River days? Which was great. So they sent me some photos, and we'd built a boat before that. So there's a whole lot of old photos from all this time. But we were totally accepted into that community, and we painted all the inside patterns on the meeting houses, and we cleaned cemeteries. And my best friend was this lovely woman, Ma Butler, and she used to call from the top of the hill, and she'd go, "Tangihanga," and I'd run up the hill grab a bag and run up the hill, and I'd go and help and be in the kitchen and peel sacks of potatoes and help with all those kinds of things. It was a privilege.
Yeah, I can imagine. It sounded like quite an, even though the sort of I found it funny reading Maoist hippie. I was like, oh, okay, that's because as you say, this is.
Yes, all the druggy hippies lived up at Jerusalem, you see, and we were so purist. We didn't take any drugs. We didn't drink alcohol. We wanted to sort of save the world. It was very
live off the land Oh, what an interesting time of your life. But yes, your poor mother at 16. I can imagine she wasn't very happy about that. And she ended up taking overseas in that time.
Yeah, she
as well,
did.
didn't
And
she?
that chapter I've called From the River to the Riviera.
Yeah.
And do you know what my mother packed to go on holiday with me? She packed a bottle of gin, a bottle of Valium, and a jar of Vegemite. Pix didn't have his peanut butter then. And she needed all of it.
Actually, there is a story about, is that where you're walking along the street and some attractive man comes and says, oh, do you want to go for dinner or something?
Oh, we were in Naples. So I'm 17 at this stage, and we're in Naples, and we're coming home. We had Arthur Frommer's Europe on $10 a day, and we're coming home from our little dinner on our way back to the pensione, and this very attractive man stopped at the crossing next to me, and he said in that lovely Italian accent, would you like to go? Do you like pizza? Yeah, I love pizza. He said, I know where the best pizza is in the whole of Naples. You must come. And I said, bye, Mum. And then about, 10 minutes later, I realized it was not about pizza. And then I had to get myself out of that one.
I love that you were thinking about the food, but you just didn't see.
I was only ever thinking about the food.
I get it. Oh, gosh. Okay, so after your time up the Wanganui River, you end up, you want to go make some money, and so you decide to head to Gisborne. To get there, you and your friends build a boat, right? And you think you're going to go travel the world on this boat, but on your first trip, you realise quite quickly you are not meant for the high seas. So you did arrive in Gisborne, and you didn't leave. You ended up meeting
a rat bag.
A rat bag. I didn't quite know how to put that, but thank you. And you started working as a possum trapper.
I
just
did.
up
I
the
bought
East
my
Coast.
first house
Yeah.
when I was 20 with all the money I'd made doing possum trapping and live deer recovery. And it was definitely crossing the tracks because, I remember arriving in Gisborne and I had lost about 10 kilos. I'd been so seasick and I really didn't want to see any of those people ever again. And there was this quite good-looking guy who ambled down the wharf, and he had a big cable jersey on, and he had sort of straggly blonde hair and blue eyes, and he was sort of tanned. And he started talking about the boat, and he'd been fishing, crayfishing, and da-da-da-da, and then did we all want a shower? And so we went back to his place, and then a few days later, I moved in.
And went possum trapping.
And went possum trapping, yeah. And I had 2.5 years, being a possum trapper, living mostly in the Uraweras in State Forest 93. And I actually I couldn't do it now.
No.
I said to Ted yesterday, I saw a ferret down our, outside on the conservatory. It's like, oh my God, there's a ferret, there's a mouse. But I love nature, and the bush is just so incredible. And spending that time in the bush and really being part of the rhythm of it was very grounding. Yeah.
Amazing. You also, at that time, not met, you saw your future husband. Tell us about that story. You didn't meet him yet. You just saw him from a distance.
So I often think about this, my very favourite word in the English language is serendipity. And I think, in life we all have crossroads at so many points. Whether you have when you go into a room and did you talk to that person, or did you not talk, or did you take that turn, or whatever. And I guess I always have been someone who has looked up and been interested in what is around the corner. And so the fact that I'm with my husband today is because I was a possum trapper, because I was poaching on his farm, unbeknownst to me. And I was working this really nice, easy bit of river flat, and I'd split up with the dodgy other guy, and I was on my own, still doing this because I enjoyed it, and it was really good money in those days. And I remember hearing this horse, it was like a horse, and I thought, perhaps I'm not supposed to be here. So I climbed up a big puri tree, and the horse stopped right underneath my tree. And honestly, it was like, where's my microphone? My heart was going like this. And I thought he probably could have heard it because it was beating so fast. And he was going, bloody possum trappers, and he was throwing all my traps away. And I thought, oh, God. And I got such a fright. So I stayed there for ages, and then I finally peeked down like that, and he was so good looking, I nearly fell out of the tree. Thought, I won't do that because I dislocate badly, so that would have ended. It was not going to be, like Water Out of Chocolate, where she jumps on the back of the horse and they ride off into the, desert. No, that was definitely not going to be the case. And then I never went possum trapping again after that. It gave me such a fright. And I thought, well, I need to move to town, get my life together, and get back into society. And there was a pub. I think it's probably the same in every provincial town in New Zealand, has a pub where all the farmers go. So I found a frock, put some lipstick on, turned up at the pub on a Friday night, and asked everybody, does anyone know if there's a flat available? I was looking to move into a flat, and this kept on coming up. Well, there were a couple of girls, they're cousins, and they live on Hospital Road, and they're looking for a flatmate. So I turned up, and I had a 185cc motorbike and a Thames Trader van. I was really skinny, and I had long blonde hair. And I turned up, I was really nervous for my flat interview. And I went in, and they said, move in now. They were so funny. And I'd wake up in the morning and think my ribs were broken because they just made me laugh so much. And there were all these pictures of farms all over the walls. And I thought, well, that's really familiar territory, but I'm not going to say anything about that because that's my old life. And one day, about 6 months into me living there, this really tall, skinny guy turned up, and he was he was the brother of my flatmate, who was 6'3". And I thought, I know you, but you don't know me. And he was the guy I'd spotted up the tree.
But it took some time for you to actually...
Yeah, I didn't tell him for years.
Yeah. And you also didn't... It was still quite some years before you actually eventually got together as well, wasn't it? Or at least
we've had
seriously.
a long courtship.
Yeah. So after this time in Gisborne, and you actually spent a summer after the possum trapping running a little Italian restaurant in Gisborne. but you were working there to save money because you had plans to travel to South America, which you did, and had some adventures. Eventually, you end up setting up shop in Brazil, making and selling croissants, which you made from not butter, but
Lard. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So I had got really bad food poisoning in Peru and ended up staying in the New Zealand embassy for about 2 weeks. And it was from a very dodgy ceviche. I didn't know you could get sick from ceviche, but you can. And I remember phoning home, and it was so expensive to phone home, and my parents were going, come home. And it was like, no, I think I'll go back to Brazil. And in those days, I mean, there were no cell phones, and there was no communication. You might send an aerogram to your family once every 3 months. And so I went back to this little village in Brazil, and someone had given me the name of a friend, and I remember getting off the air-conditioned bus and onto this little wee local bus that was definitely not air-conditioned, and bumping down the road and going back to this place where I'd been to called Buzios. And if any of you have been to Brazil, you'll know it's just north of Rio. It's the most beautiful place, and Brigitte Bardot had a house on the beach. And it was very shishi then, but very low-key shishi. And all the rich people from Rio, the cariocas, would come up for the weekend and play foosball and drink caipirinhas. And I ended up in an Argentinian enclave. And at that time, it was sort of a really difficult time in Argentina. Some of you may remember, you had the Mothers of May who still walk every Wednesday around that big square looking, like protesting about their lost children. And I write about this in the book because even then I wasn't aware of how much danger I'd been in when I was in Argentina, because I was basically squatting with a whole lot of left-wing activists, and we got shot at by police cars, and it was all quite frightening in hindsight, because I hadn't really realised the scope of, had I been caught, I could have been put in a plane and dumped out in the middle of the Atlantic. That's how bad it was. So in Brazil, I ended up, because I spoke fluent Spanish at this point, didn't speak Portuguese, in another Argentinian enclave with these people who'd all escaped Argentina, who were all from quite wealthy families and maybe 10 years older than me. And they were setting up businesses, and I rented a room from this wonderful woman, Margaret, who was really elegant, and there's a picture of me in there, and I'm weighing 93 kilos because I was making croissants and drinking caipirinhas. And she was this extremely elegant, tiny woman who sent her clothes up to New York. And one day, one of the guys, because I was just always cooking, it's all I wanted to do to get myself back grounded. I've always done that. If you're feeling out of sorts, go in the kitchen and you just get anchored and grounded, and you can make the world whole again. And always throwing dinners for people, and I just cooked. And one day somebody said, "Can you make croissants?" And I went, "Sure," because when you're young, you say sure to everything. And then you figure it out afterwards. And I rang Mother and said, "How do you make croissants?" And she was a really talented artist as well as being a clever cook. And I tried to hunt for them for this book, because I've got them somewhere and I couldn't find them. She's done all these lovely line drawings of how to make croissants, because it's quite complicated. And there was no butter, so I had to render all my own lard. And in Argentina, all the croissants are made with lard, and it makes them very short and crisp. And you have them at about 6 o'clock in the afternoon with dulce de leche and maybe a caipirinha. And then you have dinner at 11 o'clock or midnight. So it's that kind of a culture. So that was part of their culture, and they didn't have anyone making them, so I was able to make them. And then before I knew it, I had a business, and I did a deal with this guy whose name was Golero. He's a really big, fat Uruguayan guy, and I got free rent and use of the kitchen in exchange for managing this little Posada hotel in the afternoons every day. So I'd make my croissants just for my friends, and everyone would come and we'd play backgammon and drink caipirinhas, and I got up to 93 kilos.
Yeah, I can imagine you did, but the croissants of lard,
they're
so short and
they're
crispy.
beautiful.
And you'd need that in South America with the heat. You'd need butter would just melt. You wouldn't be able to deal with it. So that lard has that can stay harder for longer. At room temperature. So amazing. But you did return home in 1983, and you landed a job creating microwave oven recipes.
It was like one of those things.
They just basically gave you a couple of microwaves.
They just gave me a microwave. They gave me a microwave. And
I
went to my lovely sister, Prue Langbein, who does radio, they were living at Scorching Bay, and I turned up with this microwave. They didn't give me a manual or any instructions or anything, you see, and I was supposed to start my first demonstration that weekend. And I thought, okay, well, I'll make a carrot cake. So I made this carrot cake, and I put it in for 5 minutes, and it had sort of risen, but it was really anemic, so another 5 minutes, and another 5 minutes. So after an hour, I thought, why would anyone ever have a microwave? And then I tried to get it out of the tin, and I had a new building material I'd invented because it was so hard. My brother-in-law came, and he threw it under my mum's little Renault, and it went, like this. It was just there for months. Even the seagulls couldn't eat it. And it was one of the most sort of like, of all the people to be a microwave consultant, I hate microwaves. You know, I'd put the food in the microwave and I'd run up the other end of the thing. But I got a car, I got a food budget, and I got a booze budget. And I only had to work Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday morning.
Yeah. It sounded like a pretty good deal, but it did lead on to food styling and also catering around the country, which is sort of where your career started morphing into, into quite serious food now.
And I think that was, South America was the light bulb moment where I realised, even though I'd done all this cooking, I'd never thought of it being a career choice. And then when I started making croissants, then I could do something I liked and make a living, and it was my choice about time and what you did and what you know, like when you could say, oh, I'm not going to make any croissants today. And that was when I thought, oh, I can actually pursue this as an idea. I didn't know where I wanted to take it, but I knew what I wanted to do. And I do think I've had a few fairy godmother moments, and one of them was I came home and wrote a story about a Christmas in Colombia, which was very funny, Christmas in Colombia, which you'll have to read the book to hear about, otherwise we'll be here till midnight. And my brother-in-law used to write that column called Bogor for the Listener, and he said, I think you should send some recipes into the Listener, because I'd written all these stories when I'd been in South America and regaled my family and friends about my adventures. And I did, and not only did they publish it, but about 2 weeks later I got the call to say would I like to be a co-food editor with Lois Daish, and we did it week about from 1984 onwards. And it was that time where everything was all at once. So I was starting to write about food, and I started this catering business which I called Hot on the Spot, location catering for film crews, and then doing food styling. You know, it was just, as you say, it was all starting to happen.
But you weren't completely sure of how to package it yet.
Yeah, or where to take it.
So you sent a letter to Julia Childs, and you actually got a reply from her husband, Paul, right?
It was so, I felt so lucky about that.
But that's amazing. And he suggested, or they had actually talked about your letter, so that, it wasn't, although it was Paul who replied, he had talked to Julia, so it came through him, but from Julia to go to the USA, and there was a conference or a convention coming up, and they thought that would be a good place to sort of get more clarity.
And it used to be called the American Association of Cooking Schools, and now it's called the International Association of Culinary Professionals. And so I did, and I sort of, I remember the night I left, and I had a whole lot of people for dinner, and I hadn't even packed. And I had, it was that last night flight that goes out of, really late. And I remember just throwing all these things in the bag and saying bye and running out the door, never knowing when I was going to come back. And I went to this conference, and it was another one of those things that was incredible, because I met all these foodie people from all around the world, and everybody was doing something different. It was just a much, much bigger idea of food. And one of the people I met was this incredible French woman called Danielle Delpeur, and unbeknownst to me, she was really famous. And
was she famous at the time, or did she become famous?
She had moved to. No, she was famous at the time.
She was famous at the time. Yeah. Wow. Okay.
And she had moved. She'd had a bad divorce, and she'd moved to. She had 2 of those big gold medals, one for services to agriculture and one from the government, and one for services to foie gras. And she'd moved to America to start the foie gras business there. And we won't talk about that tonight, but that's a very political discussion, because foie gras was grown by French housewives as a means to get a tiny bit of money to buy some shoes for their kids. Whereas if you talk to political people, they'll go, well, you're force-feeding ducks, and it's a terrible thing to do. So don't have that conversation with Danielle. And she said in that gorgeous French accent, and she was about maybe 45, And she said, oh, you must come to New York, and I have an apartment, and you can stay in my apartment because I'm going back to France for the summer. And Mum had taken me to New York when we'd been on our European trip, and we'd gone to all these art galleries with lovely billowing curtains and high studs and stayed with friends, nice apartments. So I thought, oh yeah, that's a great idea. And when I turned up, I had my number again of the address, which was in Brooklyn in 1983, 4, and it was definitely not gentrified. And the first 2 taxis, just as soon as I said Brooklyn at 10:30 at night at the not Grand Central, that horrible train station on 34th Street, they just drove past. So in the end I put $20 in the window and said, can you take me to Brooklyn? Then when I arrived, I said to the guy, do you mind, staying here just to make sure I get inside that building alive? Because you had to climb over all these dead people on the footpath and inside the gate, or looked like they were dead. The prostitutes used to try and solicit me. It was really a rough neighbourhood. And she'd gone through this messy divorce and didn't have any money, and I was a poor student, didn't have any money, and we just had the most fantastic time because she taught me about cooking. She taught me what it was to be a cook, and that it's about your heart, and it's about actually nourishing people. And it's not, I'm not a chef. A chef is about a job, and it's about culinary gymnastics and impressing people and being able to sort of wow them, and running budgets and running staff. When you cook, you make people feel, no matter where they are, that they're at home, and they're at home in your heart, and that you will nourish them. And it's I've carried that with me all the time. I might have probably said it more eloquently than...
Yeah, well, I had actually highlighted that to read it out, but you have pretty much summed it up. Only thing to add there is you need to honour what nature provides and cook resourcefully from what's at hand. Waste nothing, share everything. Yeah, so as well as what you've said already about sharing food cooking is all about your heart, making people feel welcome, nourished and loved. So, I mean, what an incredible experience ending up living with her. I mean, in a rough, it sounded rather rough, but do you want to tell us who she is?
Yes,
because
so she ended up going on. There's a lovely film made out about her life, and it's called Haute Cuisine, or in French it's called Les Sauveurs du Palais. And she went on to be Mitterrand's private cook, the only woman in French history to be a cook for a French president, and he chose her because she was a cook. And I still see her. This year's the first year I haven't gone to France to see her in probably 20 years. And she continues. She's in her late 70s now, and she is my métier. She's this woman who I really admire and value, and our cooking is very different. She always says to me, oh, because I'll just try something. I'll try it. And she'll go, she always wants to do it the old way. Her food is very classic. And we had a really amazing time a couple of years ago, which I haven't written about, and we had to cook this fancy pants lunch. She asked me to help her for an Icelandic billionaire who just had the most terrible taste. Anyway, we made this lunch, and he wanted to show off about his wine, and it was just, I did it and I helped her, but it was not food I would have ever cooked.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very classic.
Very classic.
It's a beautiful movie as well. If you want, it's actually on TVNZ on demand at the moment for free. If you want to watch it,
honestly, watch it because you'll get a sense of her courage. She's formidable. She went to Antarctica when she was 65 to cook for these French environmental scientists for a year. I mean, we can all go to Antarctica for a week in the summer if we're allowed, but a year in that winter.
They call her something else in the movie, though. They don't call her Danielle, do they? Do you recall?
Maybe they call her, she's Mazet Delpeur, Danielle Mazet Delpeur.
Maybe they call her by her last name, but it wasn't Danielle. But yeah, wonderful movie, so do check that one out. So let's carry on. So you spent a couple of years in New York, or about 18 months or so, and you're particularly inspired towards the end of that. You're heading home, but you end up doing courses, two courses at the Culinary Institute of America. One is on nutrition, which you had at the time put on quite a lot of weight.
Yeah,
so
that was another light bulb moment.
It changed
absolutely. Yeah. It was the most fantastic course because what they did at the beginning, it was a course for chefs actually, but I managed to get in because of my food writing credentials. And they put down 100 plates, and each plate had 100 calories worth of food on it. And straight away, you just could see that there was a mountain of, green broccoli on that plate and 5 potato chips on that plate and a tiny bit of cheese on that plate and a little wee bit of butter and an enormous number of strawberries and they taught us how to cook in a way, because most of the people that were on that course were cooking for people in hospitals or people with health issues. And I wanted to learn how to cook food that was going to be healthy and make me strong but tasted good, because often diet food was all about actually taking things out and making it very bland. Oh, sorry. And what we learnt on that course was about umami, and it was really at the beginning of understanding umami. And for those of you who don't know about umami, it's the 5th taste. So they only discovered that we have the taste bud for umami in 2000. So you taste sweet, sour, bitter, salty, and umami. And if you think about what umami is, it's, when you sometimes have a really yummy mushroom sauce or you have something that makes you go, it's like lip smacking. Savoury deliciousness is the approximate translation of it. And you often can tomato paste, miso, soy sauce, anything out of the sea, fish, stock, and all of those different types of seaweed. And what you're able to do by using umami as one of your ingredients is make food that tastes really satisfying, but actually hasn't got that much in the way of calories, energy in it. So it was, because it's really easy to make things taste good if you just put in lashings of cream or lashings of butter, because that will give food mouthfeel and it carries flavours and it tastes yummy, but you end up wearing it. So I figured out, and ever since then I've cooked differently, because I realised it's a different way of cooking that allows you to make food that's lighter, and I think you are what you eat. And if you can eat close to the earth, like Michael Pollan says, but you don't want it to be boring. And we're so lucky here because we've got this kind of ability to buy all these ingredients that are flavours from the world, just readily available at our fingertips. And we've got all these fantastic immigrant cultures who are bringing us interesting tastes, and then we go, oh, I could make that at home.
There was the course about nutrition, and the other one was on regional cooking. You returned to New Zealand not long after that, I believe, to start building your dream. And it was like these 2 courses and your experience with Danielle and your time in New York that sort of shaped where you were heading next.
And I think my mother's philosophy too.
And also going back to your mother's and your dad's garden and cooking from seasonally.
And Mum always said this thing about anything, she really drummed into us from a very young age, anything you eat or might want to eat starts out as a seed or a spore. It might take weeks, months, even years before it's ready to harvest. So when you cook, you are honouring nature, even if you're just washing some lettuce. And when you serve it, it's a celebration. And so every meal at my house when I grew up was a celebration. And my mother would set the table. She'd set the table for breakfast. And it could be the simplest food, and she'd always light the candles, and there'd always be a jug of water, and there'd always be a conversation. And so it was this really lovely rhythm in your life. And I do think that so many things in life you can't change. You can't change a lot of big things in your life. You can't change, where your kids go to school or the kind of car you have, but you can change your life by making a strong family and strong friendships around the table.
Absolutely. It's beautiful philosophy. But what happened when you got back to New Zealand with these ideas in your head, what you had gone to America to find what to do next, in a way, hadn't you? And
yes.
you end up coming back to New
I
Zealand.
came back with a big,
and you had a
big idea.
Big dream, big idea. You end up working with Woolworths, becoming the face of Woolworths in a way, which is still Woolworths? What is it now?
It was Woolworths, and that was quite early in the piece.
Yeah,
it was 1986, 87.
Yeah.
And I went to them with a concept called Fresh.
That's right.
And said that people weren't going to the supermarket to buy mints and, no, that's not our bags, mints and toilet paper. They were going because they had different needs. Your need's different from your need's different from my need. And it might be that we've got a family, or we're wanting to have a romantic date, or we're sporty, or whatever it was. But I really have been always interested in how people live their lives and how I can help make that easy for them. And they picked up on that, and I landed this very big contract to do all their marketing for them and be the face of their brand. And then from that, it just snowballed, and I had a really big business. Well, for then it was. You know, I was making over $1 million a year when I was in my 20s. And I ended up just working really hard.
Yeah, it sounded like you were, but then everything came
Yeah,
crashing
yeah.
down.
And at the Woolworths conference, I took a whole lot of people out horse riding in the morning before the conference, and I'll never forget it. And I'm not a prophetic person. I'm a very much feet on the ground here and now person. But I remember I chose the first horse. I chose this really big, beautiful black horse. And as I got on that horse, I thought about a friend of mine who'd broken his back. And what happened to me? I fell off that horse going 1,000,000 miles an hour. It stumbled on an old riverbed, and I can still shut my eyes and go into that. And I'd done judo, and I went into a judo roll off the front and landed, luckily not on my head, but between my shoulder blades, and completely crushed my spine and broke all my ribs. And had a 5% chance of walking. Months and months in hospital. And that was a really big life change.
Yeah, it was about a year, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And you had a lot of time to think.
Yeah.
Right? And that's where the cookbooks started coming to, or the idea of doing a cookbook, or you had...
I think I had the idea, but I think I really, in that time, because I thought, oh my God, if I can't walk, what am I going to do?
what am
And
I
I
gonna
thought,
do? Yeah.
am I going to be a stockbroker? I thought, I'll be really bad at that. And what am I going to, I really did go through all these things, and I thought, well, you know what, if I could actually do this idea of sharing my passion to try and show people how easy it was to cook and how much fun they could have. Because as I started saying before, you can't change the big things, but when you change the little things, you can actually feel useful and successful when you cook. And if the recipe goes wrong, you don't think, I'm a lousy cook. You throw that recipe book out the window.
So that's where your first cookbook came about, that you self-published, which you were saying you self-published all but 2 or 3 of your books,
Yeah.
and this one.
Yeah.
The first book was called Annabel Langbein's Cookbook, featuring recipes from the New Zealand listener. Has anybody got that?
It's got the
It's
most
all-
unbelievable
Is it
80s
pink?
haircut and the pink cover, and if anyone's got it, I probably need to take you out for dinner. I saw it on eBay the other day for $450. But it was really funny because I was making all this money. I thought, oh, well, I'll make a book. And I started making this book. And in those days, it was all cut and paste. You know, you didn't have a computer. So if you wanted to change one word, you had to cut it out and stick the new word in. And we had it all on my floor in my flat in Parnell. And I was just hooked. It was like the best jigsaw puzzle I've ever done in my life. I just suddenly thought, that was the moment when I went, oh my gosh, I love making books. I just loved the whole process. I loved the figuring out what it was going to look like. It's like a fashion collection. It sounds silly, but it really is, because the way we cook now is different to the way we cooked 2 years ago, or the way we cooked 10 years ago, and the way we're going to cook in a few years' time. And so things are always changing. And when you make a book, you're trying to make it feel, well, you know, because you've done it too, and you want to make it full and whole.
Cohesive, and
Yes.
it all works together as one part.
Yeah. It's
So I can
so
see what you mean
satisfying.
about the jigsaw. I mean, it's different now because we see them as printed out drafts, but it is in your head in a way. You
Yeah.
are still putting it together and you're moving things. I mean, it's a
Yeah.
lot easier because it's copy and paste, but you're moving things around and changing words here and there. And I can't even imagine what it'd
But
be
that
like back
was
then
when
to-
I suddenly thought, oh my gosh,
Yeah.
I found the thing I really want to do. And it's still...
the rest
yeah.
is history, really, in a way, with that, because you went on to publish 32 cookbooks, many which have been translated into multiple languages. You've won international book awards, and the free-range cook was being your most popular, sold 160,000 copies in New Zealand alone. That wasn't international, which, if you were to count that down, that's probably what 1 in 25 households have a copy of that book, or I don't know if that's quite the right maths there, but a lot of houses have that book in their kitchen, which is amazing. Now that book was to accompany your first TV series, which, let's talk about that, because that's where I imagine your particularly the books just skyrocket. You know, everything just would have just gone pretty big.
Well,
being on
it was
television.
quite funny because my mantra at that time was global domination by spatula. And I'd gone to Frankfurt and had, again, that fairy godmother moment after I had a terrible panic attack and knocked myself in the toilet for 2 hours and lost all my credit cards later in the afternoon. And then I gave myself a really good talking to. And I'd gone to the Frankfurt Book Fair, which is this huge fair. It's something like 6 kilometres of exhibition space, and they have buses to get you from one place to the next. And I had the smallest stand that you could possibly have, which was 1 metre wide on the New Zealand stand. And I got there, and I thought, what are you doing here? Who do you think you are? I really had a complete, my confidence just went yonk into a huge, enormous black hole. And I used to get, and I still can sometimes get these horrible panic attacks, and I had this awful panic attack. And then I spent hours just giving myself this talking to, going, okay, you haven't come all this way to be pathetic. There's one side of your brain going this, and the other side going, rah! And I got up the next morning and I phoned all my nannies, my old au pairs from Sweden, and I said, because they'd stayed in touch and they were all gorgeous creatures from Sweden and Denmark and Germany, and there were about 9 of them, and I phoned them all and I said, I really need you to do me a big favour. I know you're busy, but is there any chance you could go down to your local bookshop and tell me the name on the spine of the most beautiful cookbooks that are there? Because I thought, well, they're in these countries all around the world, and I'm at the world's biggest book fair. And this one name came back, and it was Kernerman, this German publisher. So I went out, I bought myself a really expensive pair of Versace pants. I've still got them. They're bright green with black spots. And I turned up on the stand, and normally you have to have slept with the, somebody to get an appointment. And I hadn't. And I said, I'd like to see Mr. Kernerman, please. And I was always late with my books. So my books, it was still in galleys, it wasn't actually joined together. And he said, the woman who runs the, the appointment book, and they have slept with everyone. Anyway, she said, you don't have an appointment? I said, no, but I've got an idea that's going to make him lots of money. So he came over and he went like this, brrr, and I said, he called some people over, 2 other guys in suits, and they came over and went, brrr. This is all happening within less than a minute. And he said, I'll take 500,000 copies, world rights. And I was so naive. I said, I don't really want to sell world rights. And he just passed me the book and turned way back to his conversation. And then I had to go back to my stand and think, oh God, what am I going to do now? And didn't sleep, I just like, oh. Anyway, I got up really early the next morning, and when you're an exhibitor, you can get in early, and he was on his stand, and there were no people around. I said, Mr. Kernerman, this sounds really funny, but I live in this tiny little country down the bottom of the Pacific, and everybody knows me, because I used to go shop to shop selling my books. I didn't have a distributor. I did everything. I used to go up to China and proofpress it. I did absolutely everything. I always thought you had to do everything, otherwise it didn't have integrity. You couldn't get anyone else to do it. You had to do everything. And I said, I've got this little country. He said, well, you can have the English language. I'll take 300,000 copies of the foreign rights. I was like, deal. And then could I sell 200,000 copies to England or America? No. And I went back the next year and he bought those too. So that was a very lucky break. And then that got me into TV. And what happened was he went bankrupt for £450 million. Now, by anyone's estimation, that is one hell of a lot of money. And he took the entire banking industry down, he took the printing industry down, he took the paper industry down, and the whole thing went guts up for about 2 years. It was actually a nightmare. And I'd just signed another really big deal for a big book on the Pacific and on Italy and da-da-da-da, but I was just small fry. And so I thought, well, I'm going to have to reinvent something here. So I made a book, and I think I was the first person in the world to make a book that had QR codes in it. And when you click on the QR code, you could see a video that was on YouTube. And so I made this whole idea, and I went out and sold it to the French and sold it to the da-da-da-da. But it was literally, knock, 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 and you might sell 3,000 copies here and 5,000 copies here. It was just really hard work. And then one day I got a call from someone with a very posh voice from England, and it said, oh, hello, this is Bernard McLeod. We've seen your clips, and we wondered if we could meet you. Can you come to Cannes next week? And I was old enough to say no, and I said yes. So I went to Cannes, and I thought they would like this little idea of these little clips, but they said, no, we want you to be a star. And I said, oh, does that mean you're going to give me some money? And we ended up doing this joint venture, and they distributed my program into 93 countries.
So that was Fremantle, and
Yeah.
they also do Jamie Oliver
Yeah.
or have, or
Yeah,
So,
they were really big.
so it was YouTube video clips,
Yeah.
wasn't it? That,
Yeah.
that they saw.
And that was,
they
again-
would still be up there.
Yeah,
wouldn't
they're
they?
still
You
up
have to
there.
go check them out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, yeah. So and the television.
And then the
itself,
television,
you tell us,
the television, making television was so much hard work. It was so much hard work. So the little cabin that you see in series 1 and 2 is the cabin where we used to live. Now we live in the slightly bigger studio, not much bigger, that's just next to the cabin, which is where the third series is filmed. But when that first series was filmed, there was nowhere else to live. So we ended up camping in the barn up on the top of the hill that had no electricity, no running water, no toilet, and you literally have to be pushed up the hill if you've had a bottle of Pinot Noir to get up there because it's so steep. And people would come, I don't know if you remember, but in that series there's always the dinner party at the end. So people would come, and they thought they were coming for a party, and I thought they were coming for a party. So we'd film it all, and then we'd have a party, and they'd go home at 2 o'clock in the morning, and there would have been 2 cases of wine drunk, and everybody had had a great time, and I had to get up at 6 o'clock to be in makeup. And this went on. We did one run of 27 days without a day off. And I just felt like someone, it was like when you get the dishcloth and you go like this, it's just the tanks were on empty. So the second series, we thought we'd get a little bit cleverer. We'd say, now, you have to be out by 10. By the third series, it was like, hello, here, we're going to give you a whole lot of alcohol now. Then you can be on thing, and then bye. But it was fun, but I look back on it, and honestly, to make 24 minutes of television, we'd shoot for 4.5 days of 10 to 12-hour days. And I mean, I'm so grateful. I have this love-hate relationship with technology, because I think actually technology is fantastic now, because I make on Instagram, I just shoot it with my husband, who I think is a really great cameraman. Sometimes I have a bad hair day, sometimes I don't. People don't seem to mind too much. I'm having to work out a few things, but I'm learning about ratios and how to film it and everything. And so I'm learning something which I love. It's fun, and it's just him and me. It's not 9 people and, the cast of thousands and so much money and lights and, oh my gosh, the lights changed and we can't do it. And I'd much prefer it.
Things have definitely simplified. Well,
more complicated in some ways.
but yeah, I'm a love-hate as well with social media and all that. It's definitely, you can get yourself out there a lot easier these days, but then there's sort of almost so much out there that
Yes.
it can be a bit
Yeah.
all-consuming, and how much to share as well.
Yes.
But that's a whole another subject. We've got to wrap up pretty soon, so let's move on to 2017. You visited Antarctica. We had a few things happen through that year, but Antarctica in particular was quite a pivotal point in how you now cook and approach your food choices.
And life, I think.
And life, and which also led you to writing a book with your daughter Rose. So tell us about that trip to Antarctica and how that changed your...
I don't think I'd ever really... So I got invited to Antarctica and as a guest, and I thought they wanted me to go down there to cook, but they actually wanted me to go and look at all the science that was being done down there, and it is incredible. And the setup is that you have these big long tables, and I was only there for 4 days, but every night there's someone that you're sitting at one of these tables, and they've been up, doing all this incredible work. And on the first night there was a woman, and they'd just found these fossils in the dry valleys of beech trees. So 200 million years ago, there was a beautiful beech forest there. And then down and if you've seen the dry valleys, I mean, it hasn't rained there for, I don't know, however long, hundreds and millions of years. And down in the valleys, it was all tropical and lush. And you go there, it's so inhospitable. It's just white. Nothing grows. I mean, there's a few tiny microbes that grow under things, but it's not a place that you would want to have to live. And it made me realise just how fragile our planet is and how important it is, and there are all sorts of other much more clever people than me talking about this, and whether it's David Attenborough or that fantastic Australian...
Well, there's Greta Thunberg.
Yes, Greta
as well,
Thunberg
yeah.
and the clever Australian guy who won the Australian of the Year. Anyway, when you come back and you go, well, how can I live more lightly, and how can I share ideas about living more lightly and treating more lightly and not wasting and not using plastic and not using fossil fuels. And so I pretty much stopped buying tomatoes all winter because I realised that most of the tomatoes that we get are grown in hothouses that are fueled with coal. And you sort of think, well, can I make a difference? Because, you know, every week there's a new coal factory opening up somewhere in China, or every day. But I think unless you do make that choice that you are going to do that, then if we all make that choice, it will be different everywhere in the world. So without wanting to be preachy or dogmatic about it, I think I've learnt in Wanaka to create a very simple rhythm of life, and I really don't shop the way that I used to, and I live much more humbly in the sense of my food choices because it's very vegetable driven from the garden, and it makes me happy.
And it's also connected you and Rose and
Yes,
sort of where she's
so,
at in her life.
Yes, it was a really
food.
lovely.
Yeah.
So my daughter Rose is 26, and she's very bright and got a fantastic palate and really interested in food. And she had a very nasty water ski accident, and she crushed 3 vertebrae. So I had this whole post-traumatic stress because it just all came back like this. And she was lying down and really miserable, and I thought, why don't I teach you how to write recipes? So I sat up in bed next to her and taught her how to write recipes, and she started writing recipes, and then I became her slave and cooked them for her and brought them into her and said, this is what it tastes like, and we had this really lovely time together cooking. And she's going to come home in December, and she's going to write 2 cookbooks, so I'm very excited. And I said, I'll help you, but I want to be the conduit for her vision and help her to realise that.
Yeah, great.
Yeah.
Well, we're almost time. Well, it's time to wrap up, and I do have one more question for you. What next for Annabel Langbein? Now we do know, or hope we all know, that it is not a cosmetic business.
No, I hope everyone knows here that was a terrible scam. That was the worst scam. It was the most actually terrifying thing about technology, that you can have this identity theft. And I was powerless to do anything, and people were having their credit cards scanned by getting this free makeup sample. And then I'd have to, I'd be at a board meeting or something, and someone would say, oh, my wife just bought your, face cream. And I'd go, I'm awfully sorry to tell you this, but she's going to have to cancel her credit card. And I ended up having to go to the highest echelons of Facebook and Google. And I think it was only because of who I was that I could get there. I thought if this had just been anybody, you wouldn't have got there. It was unbelievable. And, even now, it rose its ugly head again, a matter of a couple of months ago, and I was able to get through into someone in Singapore. It's just these people are so clever. So no, I'm not going down. Although I thought, my goodness, they must be, this must be very lucrative for them to have gone to all this effort. But
what next?
What next? So I often think you have to sort of semi-shut a door or make space in your life before you can figure out what the next thing might be. And I so enjoyed writing. So I'd like to think that if you guys like reading what I've written, that I might do some more of that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Novel or like fiction,
I have got a play in my head.
Okay.
And I've got some really nice... while I was writing that, I could imagine what the next book might be. So we'll see.
Watch this space.
Yeah. It's a wonderful thing to be alive, and it's a gift, I think, when you have the opportunity to explore your creativity. And that's the thing, I think, for me, the next chapter. I'd like to think I can be creative.
Self-publishing again, or do you think you'll stick with the publisher?
I couldn't have published my own memoir. That would have been vanity publishing.
True. Yeah.
And I've really enjoyed, as I said, the process of working with Ellen and Unwin. I would highly recommend it. So yeah. Well, you've been so nice to talk with today. Thank you.
No, I was very honoured when Kerry invited me to be interviewing, or chatting, we're just chatting really, aren't we, with Annabel today, and to have her here in Nelson. It's just so lovely, so thanks for coming. And But we do have time for a couple of questions if there are any out there for Annabel. So please stand up, and there's a roving mic. So it's okay if you don't.
And don't be
Food questions.
and don't be shy to ask.
Yeah.
Often people think, oh, I can't ask a question, but if I don't like it, I'll just won't answer.
And you'll be signing books. So, and also, I believe that the books here of Annabel's book are the first books to be sold in New Zealand.
They're not
right?
in the shops.
They're not in the shops yet. These have been especially
Air freighted.
because they went to the wrong place.
Because the boats are just
The
stuck
boats
off the
didn't
shore
make it,
somewhere
yeah.
in Australia.
So these are they were meant to be the 20th of October, but these are the first ones over with Page and Blackmore, first copies in New Zealand. So we are very, very lucky to have that. So get a book. I love it, and you're a beautiful storyteller. So
Thank you.
I look forward to reading more.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, wonderful.
Thank you all for coming.
No,
Any
questions?
Other questions?
Yeah. Oh, you go.
Oh, Pic's got
So you thought you should get a proper publisher to publish your book rather than publishing yourself, and you've published all these books. So
What was
do you
the
think it will
difference?
affect sales if people think, oh, this is vanity publishing, she's published it herself?
I didn't publish it myself.
Or you didn't? No.
Not this
No,
one.
so
Yeah.
when
Not this one.
when I write cookbooks, I don't mind publishing them myself because I understand that genre. It's not really about me, it's about the food.
Yeah.
But this is a book about my life, and I
Right.
didn't feel comfortable. I don't think I would have ever published a book about myself.
And that's just a personal thing? You
That's-
didn't think it would affect your sales?
I think people would not. I think they'd think, well, that's vanity publishing. Yeah.
I'm
I don't
about to
know.
do that.
Oh, well, hey, Pic, guess what? You probably can, you see? And it's not, because you've got a story that is about true entrepreneurship and vision, and I think people will. But what I learnt from this exercise is that I really like the creative bit. And what I learnt through my other publishing endeavours is I had a staff of 9 people, and basically I was the only one creating. And so therefore I couldn't amortise those costs over a whole lot of titles, whereas with a big publishing house, they've got enough titles that they can afford to have someone on PR and someone on all of these, and so they're good at all those things. And so, sometimes I think I'd love to be a publisher because I like bringing ideas to life. But I think my husband would look at the fact that you're unlikely to make any money as a publisher. And he'd go, no. But I do think it's important to bring ideas, and the story that you have picked is going to inspire so many people. Mine's more retrospective, and I hope it does inspire people, because I think what both you and I have done is we've lived our own lives on our, we've chosen our own paths. And it's, I think we're both lucky. I'm sure I'm going to look forward to reading your book a lot.
Thank you, and I'm listening to yours. Have you got a
Not yet, no. No.
Well, thank you very much. Great question, Pic. But I think I did a master's and studied lots and lots of memoirs, and there's plenty of other memoir writers who do self-publish, so don't worry about that vanity thing. So thank you very much for hosting tonight's event, Pic. It's fantastic. I think it's been a lovely venue. The doors opening a couple of times scared me, but that's okay. Thank you, Nicola, for your fantastic questions and for your very generous answers, Annabel. It was a pleasure listening to that conversation. Of course, Annabel is going to be available over at the signing table, which is over there, so you can buy a copy of... we've also got copies of Nicola's book, Homegrown Kitchen, for sale over there at the Page and Blackmore official bookstore. So, and come and have a chat to Annabel, who will be very happy to sign copies of your book. I also want to say that we've got 2 more Pukapuka Talks events as part of this year's Arts Festival. Tomorrow night at DeVille, it's called Escaping the Poem. It's going to be lots of fun. It's a free koha event, so come along and enjoy that. And on Wednesday night, there's the launch of the NMIT Literary Journal at the Johnny Cash Room in the Arts and Media Building, followed by an after party. The journal's called Kiss Me Hardy, and the after party is going to be at Kismet. So if you know the story of Kiss Me Hardy Kismet, you can talk more about it there. So please join me in a big round of applause for our wonderful speakers, Nicola Galloway and Annabel Langbein.
Thank you.